Welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Welcome. So, welcome on my behalf as well. We would like to start on a more personal note, and specifically with Italy and your experience outside of it. So, Mr. Giulio Dori, you moved out of Italy and became a professor at the University of Amsterdam. Why did you leave Italy?
First of all, I didn't become professor straight away. Everything started actually as a student. I was an Erasmus student in 96, 97 in Glasgow. It was always my dream to to expand as much as possible, and I went there, met my future wife, and ended up doing a PhD. Was looking for a job, and turns out Amsterdam had a postdoc position, so I came here, and it was in 2003, 2004, and since then I've done all my progression here.
So you say that Italy wasn't attractive for you that much because you got more
to be honest with you, at the time there wasn't really a I didn't have that feeling. I just wanted to expand. I felt like I wanted to I felt European from the very beginning, and I wanted to expand some boundaries of the Italian or the European context, and cool. I'm still feel as much and even more so.
Interesting.
Mr. Marsili, your base is still in Italy. What are the pull factors that are keeping you there?
Well, my base is in Italy to the extent that I leave my hats in Rome and I store and pile up my books in Rome. But since many years, I'm leading a primarily nomadic lifestyle. I don't really have a fixed address, if you like, both because of the European work with European alternatives and now with DiEM25. We're really a kind of internationalist group that tries to imagine a different way of doing politics and doing civil society work beyond the nation state. And so you need to also experience this in the way that you live. I never actually lived the majority of my adult life in Italy. I left when I was 18, and then a few years ago I moved my base back there. And to answer your question, why, beyond the beauty and all of these cliches that we know, I think in the south and in the east of Europe, in the so-called peripheries, we're actually witnessing today the core challenges that the whole European Union is facing. And unless we manage to solve those issues there, I don't think our European Union has a very bright future ahead of itself.
So you left Italy at 18. Were there reasons because there wasn't that much of many opportunities in Italy, or was it because you had already a dream set to travel around the world?
Yeah, but personally also my political coming of age, if you like, was at the turn of the millennium when the so-called No Global Movement sprang up in Seattle, in Genoa, and it is called No Global Movement, but actually it was one of the largest global movements that demanded an alternative globalization. Yeah. It was very internationalist, and so since 16, 17, these are formative years, I was part of a transnational mobilization of this kind that went from Puerto Alegre to the Czech Republic. So I've always been imbued in this spirit that if we want to tackle the great challenges that we're facing, from the environment to migration to financial flows, we need to develop a capacity to act beyond the nation state. I left for London because of a scholarship in philosophy, but also because of this line.
So we could say you're two very lucky examples for Italians which have got their positions or got scholarships or became able to prolong their career outside. But many Italians leave because of the lost opportunities that they have in Italy. So for instance, 500,000 of Italians between 18 and 39 left Italy in the past 20 years. Why did Italy become so unattractive in the past decades?
I think that the reasons are pretty obvious. It's it's a question of opportunities, and economically we know how Italy had almost a lost 2 decades over the last 20 years on really growth being extremely low and the opportunities not being there, and obviously people that can afford, and they are talking about mostly also highly educated people that can afford to travel and in a free movement, in a position like Europe, these divergences are even more emphasized. Okay, you end up having regions that are hyper productive and regions that basically is desertification in some respect, and it's quite common that you end up having
so can we say maybe that when the free movement of people was installed into Europe, that Italy actually suffered a lot from that. Mr. Marsili, sorry. Yeah.
Well, look, let me say two things about movement of people. The first is that I don't think there is any problem with a significant number of Italians or French or Polish, for that matter, leaving their country and going to other European countries. I think that it could be a very positive sign of an integrated, vibrant European community. The problem is when the flux is not reciprocal, when the number of people leaving a country far exceeds the number of other Europeans coming into that country. This is the case in Italy. The gap between how many Italians leave and how many Europeans come to Italy is very significant. It is not so much the case for other countries where you have important outflows nonetheless, even from France, but those are reciprocated. So one aspect of the problem is the lack of attractivity, not only for Italians, but for other Europeans to come into Italy and hybridate, actually, European cultures as ultimately needs to happen. But this, I think, is a sign of a more fundamental point. It is not just an Italian problem. It is not even just a problem of so-called peripheral countries. We know that countries such as Romania have lost almost 10% of their population since the crisis. Okay. This is a more general division of all our societies in Europe, in the West more generally, between enclaves of winners and large stretches of losers. You have a strong mobility within Italy, for instance, towards Milan. Milan attracts people. Milan grows by 20,000 people each year, and it's a very young population in the city. And you have losers, which are the large areas of the south, some cities like Rome at the moment, entire parts of Central and Eastern Europe, parts of Eastern Germany, for instance. Yeah. So what you're looking at is a fragmentation of Europe into winners and losers.
Sure. Mr. Giuliodori, do you agree with this kind of point of view?
It's basically somehow repeating what I was saying, you know, with a kind of more elegant words somehow. But it's also a question of economic opportunities, and you know, basically what he's saying is that we don't attract Italy, doesn't attract as many as just because of the opportunities they are lacking. So it's definitely.
Yeah. So a factor that might not make Italy as attractive as other countries might be due to the unemployment. Mr. Giuliodori, unemployment is at 32.2% for the youth right now and 11.2% for the general population.
The youth unemployment,
yes,
you said. Yeah.
Yes. And these numbers haven't changed much in the past decade. After the 2014 Jobs Act, do you think that these numbers will change in the future?
I mean, as an economist, you know, as a politician, I can be here kind of speculating, but I want to avoid doing that. And,
but did you see any changes?
There's been, I mean, statistics tells you that the youth unemployment has gone down in the very, very recent years. Okay, does it mean that we are out of the tunnel? No, not at all. I mean, Italy still has a youth unemployment of 33%, as you mentioned. It's second only to Spain or Greece, which is of the order of 40%. General unemployment is, again, 11%. At European level, we're talking about 8-9%. And so it's still a big issue. There are some signs. The Jobs Act, I don't know whether it is really because of that or it's because of a more general business cycle, kind of positive business cycle position. It's kind of, you know, has generated some jobs. Many argue too many temporary jobs, very kind of really at the expense of permanent ones.
Too much flexibility, we could say.
But you know, I put it this way: it's. I think I'm not saying that. Maybe we're going to discuss later on about the Jobs Act in general. But it's a reform that somehow was needed. Whether it is a perfect one, I very much disagree. But for sure, it's basically some more flexibility towards the direction that was highly needed, and you know, to go to the standards, international standards of other kind of developed countries.
So, Mr. Marsili, you tackled before the problem between north and south divide, or we can say class 1 and class 2 populations. In Italy, we have very clearly that there's a north and south divide. So why is the south actually so, we can say, not so well developed?
So I should speak about Gramsci now.
You have to go back, I don't know how many.
We can do some history a little bit if we want to.
It is correct. If you look at the economic difference between the south of Italy and the north of Italy, it's greater than the difference between Italy as a whole and Germany. So you're talking about a very significant internal fragmentation. Obviously, there is a north-south divide, but there is an equally strong city-periphery divide within the north. Okay. If you look at the north, the city of Milan, for instance, it's one situation. If you look at large stretches, so what used to be prosperous industrial countryside between Milan and Venice, the industrial belt of Italy, what you find now is the Northern League xenophobic party polling over 30%, because that area is undergoing a process of deflation, a process of job loss, and of factory closures. So there is a difference, but this difference is no longer simply mappable on a north-south divide, whether at European level or at Italian level. Then, of course, the south of Italy has, for historical reasons, particular problems that have to do with organized crime, clearly, a weak bureaucratic history.
So lack of state, actually.
A lack of state, or a state that very often, and we know, misuses the funds that it has at its disposal. The European Commission just asked Sicily to return a couple of €100 million of structural funds because it could not guarantee the correct implementation of the projects it had submitted. So there are structural reasons for the South, but we need, the last thing, we need to go beyond the idea that if only everyone became like the North, the problem would be solved. We're looking at a structural expulsion of entire zones of our countries, of our societies, whether in the north or in the south. It's a problem of, it's the greater problem of inequality, which is a problem of stratification of society.
Okay.
Well, a problem that both the north and the south also face is the labor market. And just to go back to the Jobs Act for a second, this Jobs Act actually left the youth with some unfair employment chances, you could say, as this group now finds it increasingly difficult to find full-time employment, as you already mentioned. And so this is also a reason for them to emigrate, of course. And why do you think, Mr. Marsili, have the older generation received these privileges?
Sorry, how the older generation?
Receive the privileges of the Jobs Act.
So with its protections, like, so since the most of the population that has jobs is is more on the older sphere, it keeps the jobs with its very strict rules of not being able to be fired or to leave the job. So there's also a generational gap.
Look, the share of the population that has, let's say, guaranteed jobs is a very tiny minority, and we're mostly talking about older individuals working in factories. Anyone else has already been has seen their contract transformed by the so-called precarization laws that began in 1996. It's been 20 years now that the labor market has been made more flexible, more precarious, so on and so forth. But once again, I think it would be a mistake to continue with this mistaken supply-side economics, where we think that the problem is just that labor isn't flexible enough, that the skills aren't developed enough, that young people don't want to work enough. We have a gigantic problem of job creation. The problem is not so much the skills and the kind of contracts that individuals have in Italy, or in fact in the vast part of Europe. The problem is that there is no investment to create jobs, whether public or private. And unless we change also our economic model from one of preparing workers to one of preparing the jobs of the future and stimulating the necessary investment, I think we're just going to go down a continued decrease of labor standards without any accompanying increase in the number of jobs available.
So, Mr. Marsili, you think that there is that Italy is suffering from low investment in research and development, education, and infrastructure. But would you say that this is a mere lack of investments or more a misallocation
of resources?
Of course, there is a misallocation of resources, and there is more so in Italy than in other more virtuous countries. But it would be a mistake to think that merely fixing the excesses of Italian exuberance would solve the problem. We have a problem of low investment in Germany, for instance. The whole of the European Union, in fact, has seen its investment level at a historical low when we have, as we know, gigantic cash lying around and going to fuel financial speculation. And what is, for me, very worrying is that if there is a historical time when a very serious investment program would be necessary, for instance, to prepare the economy of the future and avoid our development model destroying our planet, that moment is now. And the lack of capacity, of ambition, of awareness of our political class that this is the time to produce the economy of the future, I find extraordinarily scary and actually an existential threat to humanity, even before the European Union.
I mean, I share a lot of the concerns of Lorenzo, but I think it's not only a question of kind of public investment. Of course, if there is a lack of private investment at some point, there is also a particular reason. I mean, it's just repeating the obvious here, but the international companies don't invest in Italy for a number of reasons, and the kind of the weak legal system is one of them. We want to kind of elaborate on that, and the bureaucracy, whatever it is, and if till the kind of so, of course, there should be a supply, demand side. Any particular tool is kind of can work in the right direction, but it's you have to kind of wonder why. Okay, we had growth in Italy that has been kind of so low compared to the rest for 20 years. And it's not necessarily even because of the financial crisis or the Euro debt crisis. This just amplified even further. There was kind of some structural issues.
Problems, yes.
Problems that were there. I mean, I remember, my parents have a small company, okay? So I come from the typical case of a kind of central Italy context with a family company, okay? Struggling with kind of, it was basically as a byproduct. They were kind of producing byproducts for manufacturing furniture and the shoe manufacturers.
Okay.
They were basically dying out well before the crisis, okay? Kind of facing the competition, globalization, and dying. And that basically was the last kill during the crisis. So structural problems on an industrial structure not kind of adjusting, to the context that were changing. It was also a big factor in that.
So for actually the problems that we see today are actually due to politics or to political decisions that are being made like 20 or 30 years or even longer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, it's pretty obvious that in terms of a political kind of offer that we had over the last 20 years, it's been extremely poor. And I know we can now start talking about from the first Berlusconi in '94 up to now, 6 legislations, 12, 13 governments, okay? A lot of instability, electoral rules that basically don't guarantee any particular governance, and the offer, the political kind of politicians in general, which is extremely poor.
So would you say that due to this very unstable politics, also banks were allowed to do what they wanted to do with their loans, and that's why we see that a big portion of the banks have failed?
Sure. I mean, we were kind of, the banking system was kind of, bankers were kind of claiming themselves, so kind of, we are really the good ones. Look at the subprime crisis. We are completely out of these animal products, securitizations, and the name and the like. In fact, okay, it's well known that the governance in the banking system is very politically dominated as well. And so the best choices in terms of lending provision is not necessarily driven by the most productive kind of, or the most remunerable investment opportunities. And I can go ahead here with, having even fights on the phone with CEOs of big banks.
Yes.
I remember a few years ago, it was UBI. It was under the light because some kind of bad investment came out, nothing to do with a subprime. And I remember myself and a friend of mine, an economist from Milan, kind of sending a very open letter, very simple, to the CEO. I say, listen, how can this possibly, how did you do that? Yeah. Okay, it's obvious that you made a mistake. And the response to that, it was the CEO, and I'm not saying the name, kind of calling me privately. I was here up the stairs, okay, and trying to figure out if there was any kind of politician or any kind of side on that behind my letter.
Okay.
He wasn't really addressing literally what was happening, why responding to that, but he wanted to further investigate if there was something going on in there.
If it was actually threat or kind of...
Yeah, if it was basically, who's sending this message, okay? And are you just a puppet in there, okay? So representing a bigger kind of political counterpart in my policy. So it was kind of involved, it was feeling a threat, it had a threat of his job somehow, and he wanted to figure out if something was going on.
So, Mr. Massi, do you recognize a little bit how Italian politics works, like this way of interacting with people, of being very dubious about their purpose, as you just stated? Is that what happens all the time?
Everywhere.
Sure.
How would you call the influence of Wall Street on the US government? We know that US Treasury secretaries come directly from Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, and we've seen how that has influenced the response to the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, and 2009 in the US. We know the gigantic overlap of interests between the financial sector, in Germany, for instance, and local politics in the regional governments. So what we're looking at, of course, there is a particularly Italian way of going about this, but I think there is a more structural problem, which is the power of money, the power of finance, the power of the banking system in the political arena, in influencing that, in influencing political choices, and ultimately expropriating citizens with the right of deciding on their own future through extensive lobbying activities, direct purchase of individuals. We know that Mr. Barroso is now the vice president of one such investment bank. So I think, once again, as for the employment and investment, I think Italy is, if you like, the most advanced symptom of a disease that is European and Western. And the solution cannot be just curing a patient and curing the last effects of a system that is dysfunctional, but curing the system itself. I'll just give you one very short example of a clearly European problem that also impacts Europe's public finances. Italy's public finances. Italy has had, for 20 years, a primary surplus in its budget, except 2 years, in 2008, when the crisis just blew up. It has the largest trade surplus in the European Union after Germany, if you bracket out the Netherlands, because we know that a good part of it is actually through illegal tax haven-related activities. And nonetheless, despite the primary surplus, despite the trade surplus, the country has been in stagnation for 20 years. Yes. So there you see that there is a structural problem in the way the Eurozone operates. One example of tax havens is actually a very concrete one. One of our largest companies is Fiat. The profits that Fiat makes go to the company that owns it, which is Exor, which is owned by the Agnelli family. Exor moved its seat from Turin to Amsterdam. Why? Because Exor gets most of its income by dividends, and in the Netherlands, the dividends are taxed half that they're taxed in Italy. So the Italian state has lost the income that would come to Exor from the profits of Fiat, and that's been given at half the price to the Dutch state instead. But we know that this is a much larger problem when it comes to tax evasion, and we have 5 tax havens within the European Union.
Yes,
we have the question
Ireland
of
and other...
Exactly. Yes. Social dumping is the same. We have delocalizations from Italy, as much as from France, towards, for instance, Slovakia. This is in the news today with the Minister of Industrial Development going to complain in Brussels yesterday. And we have created a situation where the European Union promotes social dumping, where a lowering of the wages drives through delocalizations that have as a result lower productivity, lower labor rights, and ultimately only higher profits for shareholders. Unless we manage to have a European system that pulls everybody up as opposed to everybody down, just fixing the Italian excesses will be certainly useful, but will not be a game changer for Italy or for anybody else.
So you just mentioned the stagnating economy of Italy and its surplus, but however we do see that its public debt is currently at 100.
I was about to kind of interrupt my Italian way here. Just so far we've been very kind of un-Italian, kind of jumping on each other. But I mean, it's true that the primary surplus has been positive for a number of years, but not positive enough, to compensate for the high debt and the servicing the debt. Let me kind of stress some numbers. We currently have a total budget of a deficit of 2.5%, the primary surplus is positive, the order 1.5, something like this, but we still pay 4%, the GDP on servicing our debt. Debt, which is 135% of GDP. Debt that was 115% before even entering the monetary union, And we entered the monetary union, kind of in the wrong way, It was a mostly political decision. Now we can go back to kind of the fundamental issues of Europe, also in other aspects. But Italy was kind of sick before, is sick now, there's no doubt. And evidently, kind of saying that, there is a primary surplus, it's true, but it's definitely not enough. We've been kind of spending a lot for decades, and because of bad politics, so overspending, biases on that, whatever it is, at the expense of all the kind of younger generations. And now, basically, in my opinion, there's something has to be done. Clearly on a right pace, but we missed a lot. We missed a lot during the very good times. Soon after the monetary union, we're having interest rates which are extremely high. We entered the monetary union with an interest rate which is similar to the ones the Germans were paying, okay, or the government. So completely crazy, okay, markets completely inefficient, and not kind of realizing that actually, the public debt in Italy was actually more risky than in Germany. Despite that, we benefited from that, and kind of we reduced the cost on the servicing, but just simply compensating for adding additional spendings. I want to kind of stress one aspect, because I don't know, Carlo Cottarelli, from the IMF, he was hired by Letta government, one of the many governments that we had in the last few years, okay, 2013. Technocrat, it was kind of politician number one behind Bersani. It was a better face, a bit more relaxed face than Bersani, and it would kind of go a bit more momentum. So he hired Cottarelli from IMF for the spending review. Okay, spending is a difficult issue in Italy. It's expenditures of the order of 50% of GDP, not necessarily much higher or lower than many other countries, but there is a lot of wasteful in spending in that. So the main point was done to go there, try to see where you could kind of save with the idea of reducing taxation. Not a big problem in Italy. Okay.
Yeah. So for instance,
let me just finish. Then I'll give it to you. It's the guy kind of, I remember reading with pleasure and also with sadness, kind of one of the interviews was saying, I was working on reducing by 10 billions, okay, a certain kind of part of the expenditure, and I didn't even know that the government on the same time was actually increasing another one on the other side. So it
wasn't changing anything.
Exactly. So it left for family reasons, okay, but I don't think that basically, it was extremely productive 3 years.
So we still have this big problem, which is this high public debt, which does, at times, it may bring to, at certain points we saw that we could risk default. Sure. And, but we now currently see in the political electoral period that, for instance, Berlusconi proposes a flat tax.
Oh, fantastic.
Would such a tax work?
Of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. It's first of all, to find me a developed country that actually has a flat tax. Okay, they kind of, maybe I don't know whether it is. I show my ignorance. I don't know if it is Bulgaria or maybe somewhere else. But it's really it's a completely new experiment. The idea is in a way it's nice. You reduce taxation for everyone. Okay, if you discuss about inequality, exactly, that is completely the opposite that you want to do. Kind of you need a kind of progressive taxation system to adjust that. That is already wrong. But coming from right, it's not a surprise. And but there's been some estimates, okay, of, I'm just reporting Roberto Perotti. Roberto Perotti has come from Bocconi, IGE, is a fiscal economist, well known. Kind of is trying to figure out, basically, to put a number on the political programs, the 3 or 4 coalitions or parties, main parties were kind of suggesting. The cost of a flat tax in terms of lack of revenues, it's kind of, and together with other measures of the order of 300 billion. So 17% of GDP, okay? Now, in a time where basically, so I find it very, very irresponsible, okay, to come out with such kind of suggestions.
But then would the proposed blockage of public spending then be a good proposal from, for instance, the Plus Europe party?
I like it Plus Europe very much, okay? So it's, I'm actually, maybe I'm exposing myself too much, but I'm kind of thinking that is the one where I see myself much more right now for a number of reasons. No, I just wanted to stress that basically there are kind of 3 main coalitions, center-right, center-left, and basically the 5-star movement, the kind of maybe, and rationally, knowing that they're not going to win the elections, or at least they're not going to have absolute majority. It just is a competition of kind of chi la spara più grossa, okay? Who comes with the biggest one.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you go there, you're not going to be prime minister, anyway, you're going to have a coalition anyway, and you can always blame the other one for the lack of an implementation of your promises. So that's basically is what's going on. But in this particular context, I find it extremely irresponsible, okay, to come out like this. This is a time where there is a huge lack of trust at European level between countries, south, north, west, whatever you take it. And this is the time that actually, that if you want to kind of really regain a trust, you have to earn it.
Yes.
Okay? And to earn it, you have to be responsible. And
Okay.
then I can add on for another, as long as you want.
Well, thank you so much.
That's finished.
No.
No, we'd like to move to the audience. Are there any questions regarding public spending, public debt?
So we see over there, the guy with the blue shirt.
Hello. You said that the current policies are the symptoms and the structure is the sickness. What is your opinion on the statement? The current policies are the symptoms, but capitalism is the sickness.
To who do you want to address this question? To Mr. Marsilio or Mr. Giulio?
Mr. Marsilio.
Go
Marsilio.
ahead, you like it?
Go.
Look, capitalism can mean many things. But we do know that the economic system that we're living in or under at the moment is driving our planet to ecological catastrophe and our species to potential extinction. It is structurally producing an extraordinary divergence between a handful of winners and a mass of losers, what Saskia Sassen calls the structural expulsion of people, which happens in the cities and countries of Europe, and it takes the forms of precarity, of unemployment. It happens in Central Africa, and it takes the form of multinational land grabbing. It happens the world over and in different circumstances. It is not just a question of having redistribution. The problem is primary distribution. We have a system that is driving a structural divergence between a narrow few and a vast majority of people. And the political results of it are for all to see, again, all across the Western world and also in some parts of Asia. So unless we're able not simply to tweak some policies within this system, whether we want to call it capitalism, financialization, neoliberalism, whatever, unless we're able not merely to tweak some policies, but to actually disrupt and structurally replace some of the key components of this architecture, then I think we are going through expulsions, ecological catastrophe, and ultimately a political insurgence that will come from the right and not from the left.
Are there any other audience questions over here? To the girl.
Yes, first of all, I would really like to thank all of you because I found this conversation extremely invigorating, extremely interesting, and I'm passionate about this topic. I really like the analogy of the sickness as being structural inequality, but I would like to question whether that's actually the sickness or that's a symptom of something beyond just structural inequality. Is it maybe the patriarchy? Is it maybe post-colonialist criticisms or things, slavery, or things that happened in the past, history, war? I mean, how do you reconcile all of these things, complicated mannerisms, complicated just past historical events that has happened, and how do you include these into the conversation, into what we should do practically as policymakers?
So, if I understand correctly, the question is, okay, so he's probably going to explain.
I don't know whether I get the kind of the question right. I don't know. Are you somehow implying how is it possible that we have still in the political debate kind of people like Berlusconi in terms of political offer, or is it maybe you want to kind of make it be more specific if you?
Okay. I would like to first address the fact that both of you emphasized that structural inequality is the biggest issue here.
Sure. Okay.
It's a structural problem. An allocation of finances by itself isn't going to solve anything. That by itself is not. There are other ways, other things that can be allocated perhaps, and power is one of them, and power has many forms. And perhaps some of the forms that power takes can originate from the way in which society is structured, which goes back to what you said, but perhaps you can include concepts that are the underlying underpinnings of our society, which include the predominance of the patriarchy. And
Okay. I mean, basically, the problem of kind of inequality somehow, and how can you also address it, whether it comes, from a number of reasons, is, I mean, it's, I mean, let me kind of connect your question maybe to the European context. It's there's now a lot of debate or kind of what could be the best way to reduce also inequalities and kind of create a lot of kind of risk-sharing mechanisms or kind of solidarity kind of things. That kind of funds. There is kind of no doubt that, for example, at European level, but that could be also a national level. Okay, this is kind of it's similar. There should be definitely much more on that particular side to address those aspects. I mean, at European level, we know that this particular project started with a very kind of a key missing component, which is a retransferring. Okay. Resources from regions that might be more structurally kind of in trouble versus the ones that are more structurally always in a surplus or always in a... And if you want to address that particular aspect, it clearly has to start from many sides. It has to start from a recognition of society that is kind of useful. It's solidarity, it's a nice thing, but again, I want to stress you want to kind of deserve kind of that particular solidarity also from the players that play in the same context.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Marsili, in a recent article, you called Italy a litmus test for the European Union. What did you mean by this?
I don't remember that article, but
what was that? Sorry.
So,
but I know what you
litmus
mean.
test.
Canary in the mine kind of thing. No? Well, what you have in Italy at the moment, at a more abstract level than what we were discussing before, is the failure of politics to address the challenges of the future, where I don't need to tell you, and we've all seen perhaps the series Babylon Berlin, and there is this fascination with the 1930s and so on and so forth, but we know that we are undergoing a process of gigantic historical transformation on levels of ecology, we were discussing productive model, economic model, geopolitics, and the level of the challenges that are coming up, that our politicians, that our societies should be addressing is enormous. In the recent history, for those of my generation, actually unprecedented in the west of Europe. And to this unprecedented challenge, the way that our political system is responding is abysmal. It is petty squabbles, little bickering between political parties, absolute lack of vision of what world will need to replace a world that is dying out in front of our very eyes. And the Italian elections testify to this. The debate, as you were saying a moment ago, is completely outside of anything that bears the minimum resemblance to issues or policies or these challenges that actually matter. It's a bit like a circus show. And what this circus show results in is, on the one hand, political apathy. So 50% of young people will not go to vote on the 4th of March. Political apathy also means despondency, it means melancholia, it means depression, it means the feeling of we cannot change anything, nothing can, pessimism. And on the other, extremism. And so the rise of far-right xenophobia, far-right populism, even far-right terrorism, as we saw in the drive-by shooting targeting migrants a week ago. So unless we unblock our political systems, where we're looking at is apathy and extremism, and this is a terrible, terrible cocktail for the future. In Italy, this is very present because of the economic situation of the country. But yesterday, you know very well that the AfD in Germany is now polling higher than the SPD. So this goes way beyond Italy. Italy is the litmus test. It's the canary in the mine. It will be the first to die.
It's the more evident example. Mr. Giuliodori, do you think this is correct, or does there did he miss any
No,
details?
no. I mean, I think it's you know, we're kind of repeating a little bit. Also, the political offer that we have nowadays, how kind of the current politicians are missing out completely on the real issues, are trying to kind of hide it in a way. I had to add again. Maybe it's a kind of also something to do that to mostly with Italy. I think it might be common in many other parts. I had to admit that you cannot expect that basically politicians all of a sudden in Italy become like you know, luminaries, and they kind of see exactly. I mean, the offer is what it is. The median vote is what it is in Italy. The media are what they are. Okay, and we know who controls them, how they control them, and what kind of messages are given. So, and we know that with an older population, they kind of inform themselves mostly with TV. Okay, and when it's very easy to kind of to influence the masses, and this basically goes back to why we have politicians that kind of can even, you know, come out with such, you know, completely fantastic kind of programs in that respect. So it's. I would like to kind of even talk about the consequences of a kind of these elections, you know, for a European level, what it could be. But I don't know whether I'm anticipating some questions from your side.
Well, the fact that you what I want to ask is, do you think that something like this, also the misinformation of the media, actually fuels your skepticism?
I mean, obviously, it's the case. I was this again. It's not only a question kind of transparency into institutions, information. It's not only a problem in Italy. I mean, if I can, so I reported some kind of Eurobarometer kind of survey that was very recently, and they were kind of European citizens were asked, what do you think? You know, most of the expenditure for the European kind of budget is very small. You know, nothing to do with the American federal budget. Okay, what do you think kind of European budget is mostly spent on? Now, we know that 80% of it, or maybe even more, is for European common agricultural policies. And kind of 40% of people is only for wages, 30% for security, 30% for really completely immigration costs, okay? People don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know.
Yeah, for instance.
So basically, what you need to inform them properly, and only when you inform them properly, okay, you can maybe hope for some kind of solidarity and some kind of approval of things that are obvious to everyone, okay? That it kind of is really.
You're tackling solidarity, and Italy has had a big problem in the past years with the refugee crisis, immigration crisis, where. And the EU didn't actually help out much because it implemented a regulation where the refugees need to be registered in the first country they arrive in. And since Italy is an entry point to enter the EU,
sure.
Do you think that Italy is able to? Have the economic means to?
I mean, first of all, I have to say that Italy has been definitely left alone on this process. Okay, and I mean Greece and Italy are clearly in there. I think from you know, other sides on the northern part of Europe, someone has to understand that really there is not really a one country, or two country, or three country problem. There is really is a problem. I won't say a problem. It's something that has to be addressed. And what we see now, a kind of a bit of a tendency towards anti-immigration policies, is also because of this kind of lack, in a way, of expecting or anticipating what basically a lack of control somehow would account. Of course, you can address this in many different ways. I don't necessarily agree on what is that, how it is addressed right now. I think you have to address the original source, why basically these people are coming here in the first place. Okay, yes. Maybe there could be even programs to make sure that people who actually are in economic conditions, they are not forced to do that. And not only in Northern Africa, but it is actually a similar you know, problem also in Europe. It goes back to that.
Then could we say that maybe when we did have Berlusconi at the head, which had very good relationships with Northern African countries, that the situation was better, or was that still not?
I mean, the political context was very different. There's been a lot of happening since then. Okay,
but but also because of the ways that politics has been done has changed in the past 10 years, without trying to find a compromise between these countries. Do you think we should have compromises, Mr. Massili?
Well, look, it depends. I think we should compromise, but not be compromised, or compromise our integrity. So you mentioned Berlusconi's relation to North Africa. I suppose you meant his relation to Gaddafi and Libya. I don't think it's so interesting for us now to talk about what should have been Italy's policy towards Libya under Gaddafi, but it's clear that the Franco-British intervention and the bomb raids fueled a disaster in Libya that we're still experiencing the consequences of today. And we know that the main reason for that bombing spree was for Sarkozy and Cameron to try and push the newly acquired leadership as strong men of their countries, and for French companies to replace Italian companies in the oil industry in Libya. So one thing that we have learned is that perhaps bombing countries is not a very useful way of either turning them into democracies or making them more better governed communities and societies. Something else that we should learn is that selling weapons to countries that use them against their own people or against neighboring countries is also a very bad idea. And the tragedy that we have in Yemen today, that very few people speak about, is also being contained and handled by Saudi Arabia with weapons that our industries are producing and selling to them. The same goes for many African countries. Something else that we might want to discover in the future is that when our multinationals, I was mentioning it before, grab land in Central Africa and expel communities of farmers from their lands, fueling bidonville and shanty towns, this immediately fuels the migration flows towards Europe. So we have quite a responsibility in working with countries of the global south, but that is not at the moment done, with the exception of bribing their police by paying the leaders of some countries to stop the migrants at their border, or allowing the build-up of concentration camps in Libya, where migrants, we know, are killed, raped, kidnapped, and then sold on used slave markets that are popping up in North Africa. So yes, we do need an engagement with the global south, but on completely different terms.
Okay. You want to?
Okay. Well, recently there's been a surge for support for fascist groups such as Forza and Casa Pound, and also there's been a lot of criminality against immigrants in Italy itself. How does something like this affect the elections, do you reckon, Mr. Marsili?
Well, this is what is, I think, very worrying, and again, this is a European trend, is that you have certainly the emergence of very extremist groups, such as those that you mentioned, Casa Pound, Forza Nuova, etc. But you have the mainstreaming of a xenophobic discourse in the mainstream political parties and mainstream television.
Absolutely.
So after the drive-by shooting, where one fascist shot 6 migrants in the north of Italy, Luca Traini, Berlusconi went on TV, and the first thing he said was not condemning the shooting, but was saying we need to get rid of 600,000 migrants from Italy and send them back to Africa. The media debate is extraordinarily toxic in the country. So what you have is this transitioning, this becoming right of what used to be the center ground. You see this very well in Austria, where the Christian Democratic Party is in government with neo-fascists. And not only is it in government with neo-fascists, but the electoral program of Kurz's Christian democracy in Austria was basically a copy of the program of the far-right neo-fascist of Hofer. So it's this slide towards the right that I find extraordinarily dangerous. And of course, it impacts the elections.
This slide to the right, isn't it also due to the disintegration of the left that we are currently seeing, Mr. Marsili?
Well, it's due to our incapacity to offer a vision of change in a moment of great social and economic suffering from the progressive spectrum, for sure. This is part of the equation. We have failed to offer an alternative to those who are suffering from a system that does not work any longer for a majority.
The division of the left definitely kind of played a role in that. Okay, you need a kind of a proper voice, and the voice basically has been kind of lacking. You know, it's not there. It's been there for a number of years now because of internal kind of conflicts, maybe kind of completely going away from the real of these issues are like important, like immigration. It's kind of the discussions have been kind of job acts, no job acts, electoral law, no electoral law, what is it? Other reforms in a way, or pension reforms, or Fornero reform, that basically has been there kind of, the attention has been completely away, and a kind of a proper force, a more responsible force that hopefully maybe you might come from their side. It hasn't been there.
Isn't it also the way that the left made it more personal? That, for instance, if we look at Italy, Renzi made it more personal its party. So
That was a big mistake. It was also a mistake actually making personal. I mean, you might not agree or agree with the constitutional reform or referendum that kind of was proposed a few years ago. And I personally think that, okay, going back again to the institutional setting, that Italy definitely needs something more, or something better in that. And, bicameralism, it's something that it's archaic. And you need something a little more kind of speedy in terms of process, the legislation and so on. And that was a step, maybe not the best reform. Renzi made a big mistake of personalizing, for example, something like this, burned himself. And similar to in a way what Cameron did with Brexit.
Yeah. Well, a figure for who this actually worked out pretty well, you could say, is Berlusconi. And, Berlusconi is obviously a figure that has been heavily talked about in the... not only his lamb hugging, but also his policies. Some people have called his comeback very surprising, but does it actually astonish you?
No. No, because, I mean, I have to admit, as a controversial it can be, again, he owns 3 major televisions. He can appear on his sofa, okay, with the interviewers that basically simply kind of caressing and massaging anything that he says. He can be there with the little dogs, caressing a dog or a cat, and it kind of looks cute. It gives you this idea of someone that basically is successful. He's definitely successful. He's a good kind of speaker. It's kind of charming. Sex scandals. Italians do really care about it. I'm not sure about it. Okay, and in a way they're very kind of myopic. They forget very quickly. So it's remember where we're coming from here. A guy that has that. They always also waits for the right moment. He has to resign because basically, obviously, he cannot go ahead. And we've seen already 2 or 3 times before. And then he goes back and he waits for his moment when basically there is a completely desert in terms of political offering. And then, I have to come back. You see, you need me. And the myopic kind of voters are picking up this.
So once the biggest rival for Berlusconi was communism, but now it became the 5-star movement.
Yeah, of course.
So why specifically the 5-star movement?
I mean, maybe he has some kind of fears of what the 5-star movement might do actually to his own televisions and all kind of things. I mean, he picks up in a way the particular enemy and kind of builds around it. And I mean, honestly, I very much doubt it also he kind of really truly thinks what he's saying. He's just trying to pick up precisely what people want to hear, and to try to steal potentially central voters to steal him further from the left that is in dismantle, and that's basically it's his strategy.
So, Mr. Marsili, however, the 5-star movement itself is quite unique if we look at it from a European perspective, because it's a mashup of left, right, and all the different ideals. So, how is it that they came to be and became so popular as well? Do you?
Yeah, precisely because of
nothing
that.
else.
Yeah, for that. But also, isn't it also their way of doing direct democracy also the reason why many follow them?
They do direct, but they don't do democracy.
Exactly. And it's less direct now, let me tell you. It's starting as direct. It's becoming much more as a very traditional party.
Look, the 5-star movement has taken some of the lessons of Silvio Berlusconi's time in power. It is run as an extraordinarily successful marketing company. Mm-hmm. What they say changes every day, and it depends on the opinion polls. They understand that if you say something and then it's opposite, you have a positive effect because you get a bit of both, and people don't really mind that you're contradicting yourself. Famously, on the Euro membership, they are both in favor and against Italian membership of the Euro, which is, it gives you an idea of how they operate. On migration, sometimes they have welcoming sounds, they make left-sounding sounds, and other times they sound like the far right by making statements that all the migrants have to go back home, and so on and so forth. So this is this was Berlusconi's strategy. Berlusconi is a marketing man. Berlusconi sells things. This is the salesman technique applied to politics that Berlusconi
Very successful one.
devised, and now the five-star movement are picking up. The second last point is that the five-star movement emerges when new social and political movements emerge across Europe. It is around 2008, 2011 that the five-star movement first begins to build up itself. This is the time of the Indignados protests in Spain. It is the time of the squares, the Occupy movement, and so on and so forth. And so there was a moment, a couple of years into the financial crisis, at the height, possibly, of the greatest suffering and delegitimation of the political establishment, where a window of opportunity opened up. In Spain, that was seized by movements of the square. In Italy, it was seized because of also the incapacity of the left or progressives. It was seized by the five-star movement that managed to become the space where those who don't find any solution in the current political offer turn to. But it's a negative vote. You vote for the five-star movement because you don't want to vote for anyone else.
But it did start with very nice ideals, we could say. Or not, because that was the reason why it was very appealing, because it was completely different. It was kind of revolutionizing the political infrastructure.
On the commons, for instance, in 2011 there was an extraordinary participation in a referendum to republicize water management in Italy. 27 million people went to vote. 90% asked for the republicization of the water system. The government was center-left, and against actually what the law prescribed, the center-left government completely disregarded the results of the referendum and didn't proceed onto the republicization process. The five-star movement seized on that immediately, and they became the movement of the commons, the movement that protects water as a common good, clean air, the environment. And so they are very clever to intercept gaps that are left open by a political system that has become harder and harder, more unresponsive towards demands that come from the bottom up. So it is not just marketing, it is not just opportunism. They also fill a political space that's been left empty by the traditional historic center-left in the country.
Also remember that at the end of the day, it's easier to be on the opposition to criticize than actually govern. It's, so I think, I think they are kind of, in a way, they have very, very nice ideas potentially, although they are now, over the years, have been kind of being quite conflicting, and not really very, very systematically on a certain direction. But it's a fact that now I think they are kind of they're not fully prepared potentially to go there, and we've seen it also in places where basically they've been governing.
Yeah, very interesting. About now we turn to the audience again. Do you have any question about the five-star movement, the comeback of our famous lamb hugger?
They wanted to ask.
So we give space to one question over there, the guy over there. No.
Hello. I have one question about Euroscepticism. You touched upon that. So the European single market has been built in 1951. But then, after the adoption of Euro and Maastricht Treaty, European Union was created. However, it wasn't just an economic union, it also was a political union. Many countries were tied with one currency and one monetary policy. And like you said, for Italy it was a little spontaneous to join monetary union. Would you agree that that Eurosceptical rhetoric that sounds from Luigi Di Maio's five-star movement or the right coalition of Berlusconi is just the normal outcome of political monopoly of elites in Brussels? Like, for example, we've seen plenty of those when they dictate other countries how to shape budget policy or how to shape migration policy, and that all that rise of Euroscepticism is just the normal outcome.
I mean, you're touching on many aspects here. Maybe we need another few hours or days here. But I mean, if you say there was skepticism about the European project, yes, obviously. There were kind of problems in the initial conditions. Were they kind of ideal or not to kind of go into a monetary union? Obviously not, okay? It was done maybe too quickly. We know that many countries were not prepared necessarily to go into that. One of the major things that you want to have, for instance, in the monetary union, as you know, is that you want to have some kind of countries that they're not too dissimilar from each other, because if you start basically with countries that are very vulnerable, weak, and others that kind of go on the other side, you really start very in the wrong way. I was saying some countries were very vulnerable. I mentioned Italy, Greece, or Belgium, and from the very beginning. The idea was kind of maybe things are going to get better. Okay, and it hasn't happened. If anything, actually, even. But this comes from a lack of action at European level, no doubt. I mean, if you think about the fiscal rules, it's nobody understands them anymore. Okay, I'm teaching the fiscal framework in some courses. I'm struggling a little bit to give a kind of a clear message of what stability and growth path, fiscal compact, and you name it. Okay, what it is. Basically, nobody has any idea anymore. But the fact that there were kind of some critical economic aspect that were missing from a pure economic aspect, okay? Then I don't want to talk about governance, Brussels, and so on, and maybe you love kind of talking about that even more, but it's from a purely economical point of view, it's basically was definitely not there. Many American economists will say, you are crazy doing that, and I think it came out. And they were just waiting for the kind of the bad shocks to happen. And I think also the European crisis has been also a kind of missed opportunity, in the sense that, at national level, many countries didn't do their homework when it was time, the good times. When they were the bad times, they were also badly treated, even kind of excessively so. Greece has been treated like nobody can think of. But it's never saying there's a kind of it's been a missed opportunity, because many countries maybe could have kind of done something in the good times, more that, and I think we've been protected too much even by, for example, the European Central Bank, in my opinion. In a way, I kind of covered a lot of the underlying structural reasons and problems that are still there, and they haven't been solved.
As you already mentioned, unfortunately, we don't have hours to talk anymore. So as my final question to you, Mr. Giulio Dori, will be, will the Italians overcome the brain drain, or do they lack vision?
Can you repeat it?
If they...
Well, do you believe that the Italians will overcome the brain drain, or do they lack vision?
Either we have vision. If I kind of see what is the current, let's put it this way. I would like to turn a little bit the question. So what is going to be on the 5th of March? Okay, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't see a lot of things, a lot of positives here. Maybe I can see the least damaging part, which could be like if Berlusconi and is a Lega kind of fascist and anti-immigration parties would kind of want to go there, it would be, in my opinion, a very, very kind of tricky times, a worrying times for other Europeans. The most likely scenario, maybe the least damaging, might be like a grand coalition with Sancano, Gentiloni bis, or Tajani, and in that. But again, it's not really kind of a very good news in general. I see another kind of 4 or 5 years of pretty much kind of trying to hang on and maybe do something on the debt side, because definitely there will have to be actions on the side. There's no way around.
Mr. Marzilli, final question to you. On a more positive note, do you think that Italy will have a better role in the future within Europe, or how should Italy actually behave in order to promote a better Europe, we could say?
Look, I think the problem, for me, the key problem of Italy and Europe is a mental cage around national divisions and national policies and the so-called intergovernmental system of the European Union. So what I think we need to ultimately realize is the creation of a genuine transnational democracy in Europe. A transnational democracy that empowers citizens through elected representatives, participatory and direct means, to address the great challenges that, if left unaddressed, will bring down not only Italy, but also Germany, also France, also the Netherlands. Challenges such as migration, challenges such as fiscal and tax competition and dodging, questions of peace, and what we were discussing before regarding Europe's neighborhood. Those challenges we will only address if we manage to move beyond a system where country is put against country, polity against polity, and instead we have a functioning European democracy. Italy has always been a place at the forefront of theorizing European unity. Altiero Spinelli, and much else. So I think what I could aspire to is that Italian political forces, perhaps new political parties that I know are currently in the process of being established for after the election, I cannot tell you much more than that, will participate in a genuine attempt to renew the way that a common European home operates. Okay. And the 2019 European elections, a year from now,
There's some
I think
he's a new Berlusconi.
Will be a very good test for that. If we're able to have one political program with one common list of candidates, one common vision for the future of Europe all across our continent, then we have done our bit. Yeah. If we fail and we continue with national bickering, national parties that disagree one with the other, countries that pretend to be one against the other, then I think we have failed. And the price of failure, I think, will be the ultimate realization of the dream of our enemies, the fascists and the xenophobes.
I would love to continue on, but our time has finished already quite some time ago.
A long time ago.
Yeah, as we Italians normally do. But I want to thank our two guests here today. We are going to be back in a couple of weeks on the cryptocurrencies. So we're going to have a session on cryptocurrencies, blockchain. Wow. And I would like to give a warm round of applause for our two guests here today, Massimo Giulio Dori and Lorenzo Marzili.
È una verba da